Hi everyone, my name is Sean Siegel, and today we're going to talk about US Bank Stadium, the newest home for the Minnesota Vikings, as well as the Minnesota Gopher baseball team. US Bank Stadium has a lot of interesting facets to it, so I hope you enjoy what this story has to tell you as to how US Bank Stadium was created. Today we're going to go over a few different things. First off, we're going to go over the overview of the facility, which really goes into the different features of the facility as well as gives us some background information as to how the facility was created, as well as the different things involved in the stadium, such as the location, the capacity of the stadium, and so on and so forth. After that, we're going to go into the financials associated with the construction of this facility. The construction of this facility was actually very interesting and had a lot of different moving parts within the agreement, but really this section will go over the agreement that was made to make the stadium as well as how the construction went during its time while it was being constructed. Then we'll go into the execution team. This is really a fancy term for just the construction team that was brought together to make US Bank Stadium happen. Then we'll get into the dream team, which I call the dream team because of a few different reasons. Number one, it does involve the architects and it shows who was really the designing people and company for US Bank Stadium, as well as I think it's a little analogy for really the Disneyfication movement that we've seen with stadiums and facilities, especially sports facilities, within the newest stadiums being created. So I think the dream team is kind of a nice little play on words there for that to show that movement. Then we have the events that are taking place. We'll go through the different events that they're planning on having and the different events that the stadium can actually hold and is planning to have over there as part of that Disneyfication movement. Then we'll go into the attendance of US Bank Stadium as well as the return on investment numbers and see how the forecasting of the stadium will really benefit the investors, if it will benefit them, as well as the people actually within the state. So first off, we go into US Bank Stadium, the overview of it. There's a lot of backstory with US Bank Stadium. Number one, it is actually placed at the location where the Metrodome Stadium was located prior to US Bank Stadium. The Metrodome Stadium is a legendary stadium that held many famous games, many famous events, the Minnesota Twins, the Minnesota Vikings, obviously, as well as plenty of other events that really were quite famous. And then a lot of people will also remember the Metrodome Stadium and the famous images that occurred a few years ago when the accumulation of snow due to hazardous weather within Minnesota caused the roof and the dome to actually cave in and force the Minnesota Vikings to actually play in different areas and different locations within Minnesota and really force the US Bank Stadium process to begin rapidly. So, US Bank Stadium. As I said before, it is placed in the same location, 900 South 5th Street, as the Metrodome Stadium used to be. It broke ground in December 3rd, 2013, which was actually a delay from October 3rd, 2013, which was the original break ground date, and we'll go into why it was delayed a bit later. The capacity of the stadium is 66,655. However, during special events such as the Final Four and the Super Bowl, it can hold up to 73,000 people. The stadium is made with artificial turf, which increases speed of football players as well as can cause a couple issues with football players, especially in the lower extremity area. However, it's really where a lot of stadiums and facilities are moving towards now in terms of the landscaping on their stadiums. Then, obviously, as I stated before, it is the home to the Minnesota Vikings, an NFL franchise, and the Minnesota Gopher baseball team part-time, which will actually be starting in 2017. So, The financials of US Bank Stadium. So overall, the cost of the stadium after it was built was $1.061 billion. Is one of the largest, most expensive stadiums out there. It actually rivals Jerry World, an AT&T stadium in Dallas, for one of the most expensive stadiums out there. There was a $131 million shortfall on investment, which we'll go into on the estimated cost of the stadium, and we'll go into why that happened in a little bit here. The estimated cost at the time of construction was $975 million to $1.057 billion. There is a little differential, and depending on the sources you go to look for those numbers. But the breakdown of it were that the Vikings were going to pay 39% of the overall cost, which is approximately $407 million. Then the Ramsey County was going to pay $350 million, and they were going to get that $350 million from a 0.5% increase in their sales tax for their county. Then Minnesota, the state of Minnesota, was going to put in $300 million, and they were going to obtain that money from the hospitality tax that they have placed in the state of Minnesota, from a little hospitality tax increase. However, as I stated, there was a little shortfall and a little extra cost expanded onto the estimated cost at the beginning of the agreement. Part of this were due to a few different factors, such as retractable roofing, a couple different disagreements as to what the design would be and why. For example, the state of Minnesota did not want to support a stadium that could not hold other events, so they kind of forced in this agreement the Minnesota Vikings to really make a stadium that had that Disneyfication kind of movement playing in it. To cover the shortfall, there was an inventory tax that was actually put on for cigarettes by the state of Minnesota, but they also cut out a loophole of corporate tax so they could gain more of that money to really cover that $131 million increase in cost for the stadium. But as I stated, people did feel after this agreement that the Vikings got off easy with their payment. They felt that the Vikings could have paid a lot more for the stadium than they ended up doing, which was about $407 million, a little bit upwards of that. And really, Minnesota, in this agreement, there was a lot of issues because the agreement actually started in 2007, the actual proposal, but didn't end up actually getting agreed upon until 2012 because of issues with the size of the stadium, the different things that the Vikings wanted to have in the stadium, such as a retractable roof, where Minnesota wanted a completely indoor facility so it can hold bigger events such as the Super Bowl and such as the Final Four. As we can see there on the right, a fisheye kind of image of the stadium, and really see how beautiful the stadium is and the different design that we'll go into a bit later. The execution team. So, the execution team, which, as I said before, a fancy name for the construction team, you had Hams Company, which was the project manager of this stadium. The general contractor for the stadium was actually Mortensen Construction, while the structural manager was Thornton Tomasetti. And as I stated, the construction started in December 2013 after being delayed in October. The reason for the delay was actually because there was an investigation on the Wilf's financial standing and the different financial statements that he had. But once that investigation was passed, in December 3rd, 2013, they were able to break ground and begin building the stadium, which actually just opened here in August of 2016 to the public, as well as actually held a few games. Then you have the Dream Team. Dream Team are the people that really came up with the beautiful design of the stadium and really came up with its revolutionary properties that are within this stadium. In August 2012, 5 presentations were made by architect companies to the Minnesota Vikings holding group, which are the owners of US Bank Stadium. Out of these 5 presentations, the Minnesota Vikings felt that HKS Inc. was the best architect managing group for this stadium. The reason being was based off a lot of experience that they've had. They were the architects for Jerry World or AT&T Stadium in Dallas. They also were major players in many different baseball stadiums, such as Miller Lite Stadium in Milwaukee, as well as Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. Some interesting features about the stadium is it actually has a translucent fixed roof, as you can see on the right over here. Um, this fixed roof is actually very interesting because it brings in a lot of natural light, and though the fans aren't within the the feeling of the outside of an outside venue, which the Minnesota Vikings wanted to have in the first place, until the city said absolutely not, it does still allow fans to get the feel of the snow outside and everything falling. What you can also see there is there's a slanted roof. The reason for the slant is because of the accumulation of snow. It actually will drag down the snow to a specific gutter that's easily attainable or easily accessed, and can also be heated to turn into water that all goes all the way down to the Minnesota River and exports all the melted snow into the river. As I said before, the Minnesota Vikings did want a retractable roof and originally an outdoor stadium, but they were forced to make changes because the city made sure that if the Minnesota Vikings were to stay in Minnesota, they needed to create a stadium that would hold more events than just the Minnesota Vikings games. Another interesting aspect to the stadium is big glass doors that on the east side of the stadium actually open up, and they're the 5 biggest glass doors in the entire country, actually, that do move, and you can actually enter the stadium through those doors. It's actually a magnificent sight. I could not find a picture. However, it is a magnificent sight, and it does bring a little bit of the outdoor feel inside into the stadium, and provides that little extra weather advantage that the Minnesota Vikings need for their games. So when looking at the events that the stadium holds, we really see that the Minnesota Vikings stadium really plays on the Disneyfication movement. Minnesota Vikings are the main tenants of the stadium, as well as the Minnesota Gophers baseball team. But in addition to that, it's planning on holding a Super Bowl in 2018, which is supposed to be a very exciting time for the NFL, especially with what's planned for in the future for the Minnesota Vikings football team. In addition to that, they plan to hold many concerts and other major events, such as the Final Four. The Final Four will actually be there in 2019, and there is a bid out for the College Football National Championship playoff game to be played in US Bank Stadium in 2020. Of course, also the X Games will be there as well in the near future. A couple different X games will be at US Bank Stadium as well. So the attendance of the stadium just opened this year. The first game had a sellout crowd, and the first game that was truly played in US Bank Stadium was a soccer game between Chelsea and I think a Manchester team, as you see over there to the right. The first game the Minnesota Vikings played was the Green Bay Packers on September 18th. Sellout crowd, and it's already being considered one of the loudest stadiums in the entire NFL, which is great to hear and really brings a lot of extra exposure to the stadium. In addition, as you can see, the fans are much closer to the field than any other stadium. There's 131 executive suites, all designed specifically to get as close to the stadium as much into the action as possible. The ROI. So the main thing with the return on investment is it's hard to see true numbers right now because of how new the stadium is. However, it's already sold out for all of 2016 for the Minnesota Vikings, and the fan reaction has been wonderful. In addition to that, the area surrounding the stadium, as you can see, is really being updated and rectified with Wells Fargo headquarters, as well as different apartments and shops. And those are my references, and I hope